Okay, so we've got like a really interesting mix of lectures for this deep dive,
Hmm.
um, all focused on literature. But
Mm.
instead of just focusing on one book, we're going to kind of see how these lectures connect to like a bigger idea, the power of stories and like the choices that we make. What do you think? Are you ready to like see how all these pieces fit together?
Absolutely. It's fascinating how all these lectures, while focusing on like individual works, reveal broader patterns about storytelling and the human condition.
Exactly. So let's just jump right in. One thing that really stood out to me was just how important the narrator's voice is.
Mm.
It's like we don't often think about how the person telling the story shapes our entire experience of it.
You even chose a book narrated by Death, the book thief. That's got to be like a unique perspective, right?
It is. What Zusak does so brilliantly in The Book Thief is that he makes Death a surprisingly sympathetic and insightful narrator. You almost forget it's Death telling the story because he's so invested in the lives of these characters. So it's not like the scary Grim Reaper figure we usually imagine.
Yeah.
Does that change how we see the other characters, especially since the story is set during like such a dark period of history?
Absolutely. Death's perspective allows us to see the beauty and brutality of human existence side by side, particularly during wartime. He observes both the best and worst of humanity.
I can see how that would add another layer of meaning to the story. The lecture mentioned scenes like Rudy's kindness towards the dying pilot or the bombing of Himmel Street. Does having Death narrate those moments hit us harder emotionally?
It does. It really emphasizes the fragility of life and how even small acts of compassion can have a huge impact.
Wow, that's powerful. Okay, but let's switch gears to another book you selected, Bulgakov's The Master and Margarita. The lecture about this one also focused on the narrator, but in a very different way.
Yes, The Master and Margarita is really complex. It has multiple narratives woven together, and it's not always clear who the narrator is. This ambiguity adds to the novel's mysterious and fantastical atmosphere.
Okay, so it's like a literary puzzle box. The lecture suggested that maybe the poet Ivan is like the overarching narrator because he's there at the beginning and end of the story. Do you think that holds up?
That's one interpretation, and it makes sense if you look at Ivan's journey. He starts as a skeptic, but then he meets Woland, who claims to have witnessed the trial of Jesus. This encounter changes Ivan, and he eventually becomes a kind of disciple to the master. It's like Bulgakov is saying that even in a world that tries to suppress spirituality, there's a human need for something beyond the material.
That's interesting, especially considering the setting of Moscow under Stalin's rule. The lecture mentioned that Bulgakov seems to be using Woland, a satanic figure, to turn our expectations upside down. How does that work?
Woland doesn't tempt people to sin in the traditional sense. Instead, he acts as a mirror, reflecting society's hypocrisy and emptiness. He punishes those who are greedy and selfish, but rewards acts of compassion. It's almost like Bulgakov is suggesting that even the devil can recognize true goodness.
That's a really thought-provoking way to critique a totalitarian regime. But there's another layer to this story, right? The master writes a novel about Pontius Pilate and Yeshua, which is basically a reimagining of the biblical story. How does that fit into the bigger picture?
The master's novel within a novel is crucial. It strips away the divinity of the biblical story and focuses on the human drama. Yeshua is portrayed as a compelling but ordinary man who challenges the authority of the state. Pilate becomes the tragic figure wrestling with his decision to condemn an innocent man.
So it's a story about individual conscience versus the power of the state, which seems to be a recurring theme in The Master and Margarita. This connects to another idea from the lectures, challenging the traditional literary canon. You even chose a book, Gogol's Dead Souls. That one lecture suggests as an alternative to Tolstoy's War and Peace. Tell me more about that.
The traditional literary canon is often criticized for being too narrow. It can exclude voices from marginalized communities or works that challenge the status quo. So who decides what we should all be reading, and what might we be missing?
That's a great question. It makes me wonder if I'm only seeing a small part of the literary landscape. So how does Dead Souls fit into this?
Both Dead Souls and War and Peace offer insightful critiques of Russian society. But Dead Souls does so with satire and humor, which some readers might find more accessible and engaging. It's about a con man who buys up the dead souls of serfs to gain wealth and status, exposing the absurdity of the Russian bureaucracy.
So it's not just a funny story. It's a social commentary.
Exactly. Gogol uses this bizarre premise to expose the greed and corruption of the landed gentry and the spiritual emptiness of many characters. It's just as thought-provoking as War and Peace, but in a different way.
I love that. It's like you're saying there are many paths to literary greatness. Another book you chose, Sandra Cisneros' The House on Mango Street, also challenges the traditional canon, right?
It does. The House on Mango Street provides a fresh perspective on the coming-of-age story, particularly for young women. It's told through a series of vignettes about Esperanza, a young Latina girl growing up in Chicago. She's navigating poverty, gender expectations, and her own identity.
The lecture contrasted this with the coming-of-age stories of someone like Jane Austen. What makes Esperanza's story stand out?
While Austen's work is brilliant, it reflects a specific time and place. The House on Mango Street speaks to a different experience. Esperanza's story resonates with readers who might not see themselves in more traditional literature.
It's about making space for different voices and perspectives, right?
Precisely. And The House on Mango Street, with its lyrical prose and intimate storytelling, has become a modern classic. It resonates with readers across generations and cultures.
It sounds like all of these books, in their own way, are challenging us to expand our definition of great literature. But there are two more lectures we need to dive into. You picked The Spy Who Came In From the Cold by John le Carré and the graphic novel Watchmen by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. The lecture notes said these both challenge our ideas about heroism. How so?
Both The Spy Who Came In From the Cold and Watchmen present a darker, more cynical view of the world than you usually see in spy stories or superhero comics.
So are you saying that instead of clear-cut heroes and villains, these stories are more morally ambiguous?
Exactly. The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, for example, features a protagonist named Alec Leamas. He's a disillusioned British agent who gets manipulated by his own government. Leamas is far from a suave, gadget-wielding hero. He's a weary man grappling with the ethical gray areas of his job.
So it's not like James Bond where you always know who the good guys are. Le Carré is forcing us to question whether there are even any good guys in the world of espionage.
That's the central question. Leamas realizes that both sides in the Cold War are willing to sacrifice individuals for their own goals. He's disillusioned by the hypocrisy of the West and the brutality of the East.
It sounds like a much more realistic take on espionage,
Yeah.
even though it's fiction.
Yeah.
So how does Watchmen fit into this discussion of flawed heroes? It has superheroes, but I'm guessing they're not your typical comic book types.
You're right. Watchmen takes the superhero archetype and puts it in a gritty, realistic world on the brink of nuclear war. These heroes are aging, disillusioned, and dealing with personal demons. They're not fighting for some abstract ideal. They're struggling with real-world problems like political corruption and the threat of global annihilation.
So their struggles are much more relatable, even though they have superpowers. Do any specific characters come to mind?
Definitely. Dr. Manhattan, for example, is a godlike being, but he's become detached from humanity. He struggles to connect with people emotionally and questions the value of human existence. It's like the weight of his power has made him lose sight of what it means to be human.
That's a really interesting take on what it means to be powerful. And then there's Wolschoff, right? The lecture mentioned him as an example of a vigilante who operates outside the law. What makes him a flawed hero?
Rorschach is driven by a strict moral code, but his methods are brutal. He represents the dangers of extremism and how hard it is to reconcile ideals with the realities of the world. It's like Moore and Gibbons are saying that even people with good intentions can become dangerous if they lose sight of their humanity.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, and there's still more to discuss. But before we move on, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. What's standing out to you so far about these different works? Is there like a common thread that you're seeing?
What fascinates me is how these authors, despite using different genres and styles, are using storytelling to tackle fundamental questions about human nature, morality, and the choices we make. They aren't giving us easy answers. They're inviting us to participate in these complex conversations and think critically about the world.
They're all pushing us to look beyond the surface, to question our assumptions, and to see the power of stories to both connect and challenge us. And I have a feeling our next discussion about Life of Pi will add even more depth to this. But for now, let's take a short break. We'll be right back to continue our deep dive into the power of stories and the choices we make. Welcome back. I'm really excited to kind of dive into our next book, Life of Pi by Jan Martel. After all those discussions about like flawed heroes and moral dilemmas, this one feels like a breath of fresh air, even though the lecture notes say it's about faith versus reason in the face of hardship.
It's a fascinating book. Life of Pi takes us on this incredible journey of survival, both physically and spiritually. Pi, our protagonist, is stranded on a lifeboat with a Bengal tiger after a shipwreck, and his deep faith is put to the test as he confronts the harsh realities of being lost at sea.
Okay, so it's not just about staying alive, but also about holding on to hope and belief in the face of like unimaginable circumstances. And you mentioned a Bengal tiger. It's got to be symbolic, right?
Absolutely. The tiger, Richard Parker, is like a key element in the story. Martel uses this fantastical element, and others, to blur the lines between reality and imagination, making us question what we believe and why.
So it's like he's asking, what is truth? Is it what we can see and touch? Or is there room for something more? The lecture mentioned that Pi offers two versions of his story, one with animals and one without. Which one do you think we should believe?
That's the beauty of the novel. Martel leaves it open to interpretation. Pi argues that the animal story, while unbelievable, is the better story. He suggests that too much reliance on reason can limit our understanding of the world.
So he's saying that we need both reason and imagination to grasp the full picture. We shouldn't be afraid to embrace stories that challenge our logical minds.
Exactly. Think about it. If Pi can convince himself that he survived 227 days at sea with a tiger, then what else is possible? What other seemingly impossible things might we be able to achieve if we open ourselves up to belief?
That's a great point. But the lecture also talked about how Life of Pi is about faith and religion. Pi practices Hinduism, Christianity, and Islam. How does his faith play into this idea of choosing to believe?
Pi's faith is a source of strength for him throughout his ordeal. He questions and doubts, of course. But ultimately, his belief in something greater than himself helps him survive both physically and emotionally. He even sees elements of his different faiths reflected in Richard Parker, finding a connection between the spiritual and the natural world.
That's a really interesting perspective.
Yeah.
It's like he's finding a way to reconcile his faith with the harsh realities of the situation. He's not rejecting logic or reason, but he's also not limiting himself to a purely rational view of the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Life of Pi encourages us to embrace the mystery and wonder of life. Even in the midst of suffering and uncertainty, it suggests that choosing to believe, whether it's in God, a fantastical story, or our own ability to overcome challenges, can be a powerful act of resilience and hope.
It's almost like a reminder that sometimes the most important truths can't be explained logically. They have to be experienced and felt.
I agree. Life of Pi reminds us that stories have the power to connect us to something larger than ourselves, whether that's faith, hope, or simply the shared human experience of struggle and triumph. Stories can help us make sense of the world and find meaning in our own lives.
So from death, as a narrator in the book Thief,
Yeah.
to a man sharing a lifeboat with a tiger in Life of Pi, we've seen how authors use storytelling to explore complex themes and challenge our perspectives.
And we've only just scratched the surface. Each of these books and the lectures you've chosen offers a unique lens through which to view the world and our place in it.
It's like we're building a toolkit for understanding literature, and maybe even life itself.
Yeah.
But there's still one more piece to add to our collection. We need to revisit P.D. James and her crime novels, which take us into like a different realm of storytelling, ready to solve some literary mysteries.
Absolutely. Let's explore how P.D. James uses her detective stories to delve into the depths of human nature and the lasting impact of crime.
Okay, we're back for like the final part of our deep dive. It feels like we've journeyed through so many different worlds and perspectives today, from fantastical tales to gritty realities.
We have. And I think our final stop, P.D. James's crime novels, offers a fascinating contrast to the books we've discussed so far.
Right. We've talked about flawed heroes and moral ambiguity, but it seems like James kind of takes those ideas in a different direction.
Mm.
You chose to focus on Shroud for a Nightingale and Death of an Expert Witness, and the lectures really highlighted how her detective stories are about more than just solving crimes.
Exactly. While James's novels definitely have the elements of like a classic whodunit, she goes deeper, exploring the psychology of her characters and the impact of crime on the community. Her detectives Adam Dalgliesh and Cordelia Gray are brilliant at their jobs, but they also carry personal burdens and face their own inner struggles.
So there's like a human element that goes beyond the puzzle of who committed the crime. The lectures mention this idea of the contaminating nature of murder. What does that mean in the context of James's work?
It means that murder isn't just an isolated event. It has a ripple effect, leaving behind a trail of pain and consequences for everyone involved. James is interested in those ripple effects, the secrets and lies that exist beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary lives.
It's almost like she's saying that everyone is connected, and that a single act of violence can shatter those connections, leaving like a lasting impact on the community.
That's a great way to put it. And her detectives, especially Dalgliesh, are acutely aware of this. They're not just solving puzzles. They're wading into the depths of human darkness and confronting the devastating effects of those actions.
So even when they solve the case and bring the perpetrator to justice, there's still a sense of loss and sadness, like things can never truly go back to the way they were.
Precisely. That sense of loss permeates James's novels. It's not just about catching the bad guy. It's about understanding the human cost of crime and how it leaves scars on individuals and communities.
That's a powerful message, and it makes me think about another theme that the lectures touched on: alienation. Many of James's characters, both victims and perpetrators, seem to be isolated and disconnected from others. How does that play into her exploration of crime and its consequences?
Alienation is a major theme in James's work. Her characters are often struggling to find meaning and connection in a world that can feel indifferent or even hostile. This sense of isolation can contribute to their vulnerability, making them easier targets for criminals or even driving them to commit crimes themselves.
It's almost like James is saying that everyone has a story, and sometimes those stories are filled with pain, loneliness, and desperation. And when those stories collide, the results can be tragic.
That's a very insightful observation. James's novels remind us that even in the darkest corners of human experience, there's still room for compassion and understanding. Her detectives, despite their flaws, approach their cases with a sense of empathy, trying to unravel the motivations behind the crimes and to see the humanity in everyone involved.
It's like she's saying that everyone deserves to have their story heard, even the victims and the perpetrators.
Exactly. And through her writing, James invites us to listen to those stories,
Yeah.
to look beyond the surface of crime and punishment, and to consider the complex web of factors that contribute to both good and evil.
Okay, so we've come full circle. We started with the power of stories, and we've ended with the power of stories. But along the way, we've explored so much more: the complexities of human nature, the choices we make, and the ways in which literature can challenge our perspectives and make us think critically about the world.
It's like we've taken a journey through the landscape of literature, exploring different genres, styles, and themes. And each stop along the way has offered us new insights and tools for understanding not just the books themselves, but also ourselves and the world around us.
It's been a true deep dive, and I feel like I've learned so much about how to read, how to look for those deeper layers of meaning, and how to connect those meanings to my own life.
And isn't that the beauty of literature? It's a lifelong conversation, an ongoing exploration of what it means to be human. It's about engaging with stories, asking questions, and allowing ourselves to be challenged by different perspectives.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what do you hope our listeners take away from this conversation? What should they keep in mind as they continue their own exploration of literature?
I hope they remember that every story, every book, every poem has the potential to offer new insights. It's up to us as readers to be curious, to ask questions, and to be open to the transformative power of stories.
It's about being an active participant in the conversation, not just a passive consumer of words. And it's about recognizing that the most compelling stories are often the ones that defy easy answers, leaving us with more questions than we started with.
Beautifully said, and those questions, that uncertainty, is where true learning and growth happen. So, dear listener, as you go about your day, remember to keep that sense of curiosity alive. Look for the stories hidden in the everyday, and allow yourself to be surprised by the power of literature to illuminate the world around you.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.